Hello and welcome to Upwards Acceleration Part 3. Part 3 will cover weight. In this installment, we will physically demonstrate the relationship between acceleration and weight. To conduct these demonstrations, we will be using an elevator to manipulate the rate of vertical acceleration, an accelerometer to verify the rate of acceleration, and some digital scales to measure weight. Previously in Part 2, we examined free fall and saw there is no measurable acceleration in free fall. I wanted to start off by dropping a weight on the scales to see what happens to weight during free fall. When I did this first drop, I was expecting the weight to go from 12 grams to 0 grams. But instead the weight dropped to minus 84.8 grams. At this point I realized that the top surface portion of the scales themselves is also pressing down onto the sensor, but the weight of this plastic part is zeroed out at the beginning. The top portion of the scales has a weight of its own, but we zero out this weight when we turn the scales on. Then we add our coin, and the scales read 12 grams. What had happened during the drop was that the weight of the coin disappeared, but also the weight of the top portion of the scales disappeared too, taking the reading down to minus 84.8 grams. Therefore, I assumed the top portion of the scales must weigh 84.8 grams. So I did some more drops to verify that. For this next drop, I replaced the coin with a heavier rubber mat, which weighed around 24.8 grams. When I dropped this heavier weight, again the scales still went down to minus 84.8 grams. This test also indicated that the top part of the scales weighs around 84.8 grams. Next, I simply zeroed out the scale and dropped it with no additional weight. The scales went from 0 to minus 84.9 grams, again confirming the previous results. For the last drop, I placed the rubber mat on the scale and zeroed it out, so that when I removed the mat, the scale registered minus 24.7 grams. When I dropped the scale this time, the weight went from minus 24.7 to minus 109 grams, which is the combined weight of the rubber mat and the top portion of the scale. These demonstrations show that weight completely disappears in free fall. There was no more than 0.1 gram variation in my results, which is the tolerance of the scales. In free fall, nothing is pushing or pressing against anything else. That is because there are no accelerations. In free fall, everything is weightless. There is no acceleration, and there is no weight. Next, we will take our equipment to an elevator. The elevator both accelerates and decelerates in the vertical direction, so we can measure the effects in relation to weight. Here we are inside the elevator, with a slab of slate stone weighing almost 2 kilograms resting on our scales, with an accelerometer to the side, measuring the acceleration in the vertical z-axis. As the elevator accelerates upwards, the weight registered on the scale increases. Then, as the elevator decelerates, the weight decreases. Now, let us watch that again. Notice that while the accelerometer registers 9.8 meters per second squared upwards acceleration, the scale reads 1933 grams. Then, as the elevator accelerates upwards, the rate of acceleration peaks at 10.67 meters per second squared, and the weight on the scale reads 2,103 grams. Then as the elevator decelerates to the next floor, the accelerometer reading drops to 8.66 meters per second squared and the weight reduces to 1705 grams. As the elevator accelerates upwards, we have an overall 8.77% increase in acceleration and an 8.79% increase in weight. As the elevator decelerates, we have an overall deceleration of 11.73% and an 11.8% decrease in weight. This test shows that weight is directly proportional to the rate of acceleration. Over the space of a few weeks, I traveled to 4 different locations, testing different elevators I tested different weights and tried different scales. Depending on the building and the distance between levels, the elevators performed differently. Some accelerated and decelerated quicker than others. But regardless of the elevator, the results were consistent and the weight increases and decreases were always directly proportional to the rate of acceleration. Any slight discrepancies were inside the tolerances of the equipment used. In conclusion to Part 3, I can confirm that weight is directly proportional to acceleration. The weight of an object is the mass of the object, multiplied by the rate of acceleration. This means that if you double the acceleration, you will double the weight. If you halve the acceleration, you will halve the weight. With no acceleration, you have no weight. It is the acceleration that creates the effect of weight. Lastly, before I end this Part 3, just for those people who believe that Earth could be traveling up at a constant velocity, I can confirm from my own tests that when the elevator travels upwards at a constant velocity, the weight on the scales is exactly the same as when the elevator is not moving. Adding constant velocity has no effect whatsoever. This verifies the laws of motion, and it completely debunks any constant velocity rising Earth claims. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next part in the series.